Okay, welcome to the video. This video is going to be about the trigger upgrade options for the Sig Sauer P320. I know I did a video last year. Since then I've gotten a couple different options that I wanted to include in this new video. This past week I've seen quite a few pictures posted, people upgrading their triggers. Most of them were Apex. There was a Keyrez one to my surprise, which was nice. And then people get curious, they start asking questions. I get a lot of private messages. People want specifics on different triggers, so I decided to kind of redo my video and put it out there, so hopefully it gives a lot of people a lot of answers and they can make a better decision on what type of trigger or which brand they want to go with. So the ones we're going to be talking about today, I have the Apex trigger kit in this 320, and I have the Grayguns competition kit in my 320RX, and I have the Sig Armor's competition level action job with the Keyrez Pro adjustable trigger in the X5. So we're going to be primarily touching on all of those, and then this is going to be more of a visual video rather than data. My first one was data. Maybe a lot of people didn't get it, but I was trying to show in thousandths of an inch the differences between the triggers, which makes a lot of difference. It actually shows and gives proof rather than opinion about how the trigger operates. So that will be included at the end of this video. I won't go deep into it. It's gonna be more of a visual to show you, how the trigger looks when you pull it and how it feels. So with that, let's get started. Okay, you got to ask yourself, what type of trigger is right for you? Do you want a trigger that's lighter, or do you want a trigger that the trigger travel is shorter? So the trigger travel can be kind of broken up into 4 major areas. They can be broken down further, but we're not going to discuss all that. So the first area would be your take up. So when you're all my weapons are clear. When you're pulling the trigger, the amount of movement here is known as your take up. So I'm basically pulling the trigger till it hits resistance, which is called the wall. And if I pull it any further, now we're talking about creep. And that's the mechanical part inside the trigger actually starting to move and everything to the point where it fires. So we got take up, creep, and then once it fires, any movement after that is called over travel, okay? And then your firearm will cycle, and then the amount of travel going forward is called reset. So there's your reset, and then basically it's ready to fire again. So that's the kind of 4 different stages of the trigger travel. And then you also have the trigger pull weight. So those are going to be the kind of 5 areas that we're going to discuss in this video. Now, Sig Armor, Apex, Keyrez, Grayguns, they're all different kits. And you can certainly have any one of these installed by a gunsmith if you're not comfortable taking apart your firearm. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, then how involved do you want to get into doing your trigger kit? Are you comfortable with taking apart the sear and all that stuff, or do you want to just take off the trigger and trigger bar? So different kits, you can get different items in the kit. So a basic kit, your very basic kit, as everybody's seeing now with the P365 and the flat trigger and stuff like that, you can get just the trigger shoe. Okay, so this is a stock P320 curved trigger shoe that's come out of one of these. So when you get a upgraded aftermarket trigger shoe, your trigger bar pin here can be located a little bit further away from the axis of which the trigger hinges on. When now you get into geometry, and that can decrease the amount of pull weight. It can shorten the trigger, can make it longer. It all depends on how the manufacturer made that trigger shoe. So there's one option. And then if you go with like a kit like the Apex, now Apex makes just trigger shoes. They make kits. So if you get a kit, it would come with a new trigger bar in the kit. This is just a stock one because the Apex one's in my 360 or my 320. So it would come with a new trigger bar. It would come with a new trigger shoe, and then it comes with a little tube that goes over your over travel stop and a little spring. So between those 4 pieces, it's decreasing the amount of pull weight, and then it's shortening up the 4 different stages of the trigger pull. So that's your second kind of option there. A third option would be like the Grayguns competition kit, which comes with your choice of a flat or a curved trigger. This is, again, the stock P321. This is all the stuff that came out of my RX. So your trigger shoe, it comes with a new sear. So now we're getting into more of the guts of the trigger where you're disassembling all of it to replace these parts right here. So you got a new sear. It comes with 4 sear springs. It only takes 2. I don't think you have extras here or what, but they all look identical. So 2 new sear springs, a new trigger bar spring, okay, and then a safety lever pin polished up. Again, this is all the factory parts that came out of my 320. These are not from the kit. The kit's in my gun. So that's your third option. And then your fourth option would be to send out your pistol to a gunsmith and have him modify the parts that are currently in it. So that's what I've done to the FCU in the X5. So depending on your comfort level, which kit's good for you. Obviously, a gunsmith can put this stuff in no problem, so that's an additional cost you might have to consider if there's even one in your area. So that's the kind of different trigger kits. Now we'll get into the specifics of each one. Okay, so first up is going to be the Apex trigger kit. Apex offers quite a different combinations that you can get. You can get just the trigger shoe, which you can get in the curved or flat option. And then they have trigger kits, which you can get in the curved or flat trigger shoe with different amounts of difference in the kit, I guess. Basically, one reduces the trigger travel more than the other one, depending on how much difference you want in your trigger. So this one here is the 112-031. It's the kit that changes the trigger the most. I've got 2 of them. 2 of my 320s have this kit in it. I love it. It's actually the first kit I've ever bought when I first got my 320, and I just really like it for a lot of reasons. So when people are asking me what do I recommend based on their skill level and what they're going to use it for, this really usually is my #1 recommendation because it's super easy to install and it makes the most amount of difference in your trigger pull. So if you want to get an upgrade and you want a different trigger, well, you want it to be really different, not just, yeah, I think that's a little bit shorter or a little bit lighter. So that's why I go with this one. So this comes with the trigger shoe, the trigger bar, the over travel stop tube, and a spring that goes on that pin as well. So all firearms here are clear today, obviously. So just to give you kind of an idea, this is going to be more of a visual video than a data video. This is what we're talking about with take-up, okay? So you're going to kind of have to remember these as we compare the different options to get a visual. So that's my take-up, basically from full rest to where I feel resistance, called the wall. That's where the trigger mechanics is going to start moving inside mechanically. And then we got creep. And then once it fires, the amount of room after the creep is called your over travel. And then your slide is going to cycle. And then going forward, your reset. And then it's ready to fire again. So not a whole lot of take up. Everything's very crisp. Okay. That's the Apex kit. So like I said, it's really my favorite. It's very reasonably priced. I think they're going for $124 right now. It literally takes, I mean, if you've done it a couple times, it would probably take you less than, 3, 4, 5 minutes to put this in and then go out shooting. So that's the Apex kit. Next, we'll talk about the Grayguns competition kit. Okay, next up is the Grayguns competition trigger system. This one's going for $129 on Grayguns. This comes with the trigger shoe, a trigger bar spring, a new sear springs, over travel stop tube, and a pin for your safety lever. So this one takes a little bit longer to put in. Basically, I take the whole guts of the trigger apart and replace it with all these parts, put it back together. As far as function, This is the lightest trigger pull out of all the kits available, okay? It's about 1.5 pounds less than the Apex, I believe. Again, I'll post all these numbers with this video so you can compare them for those that you like data. As far as the rest of the trigger pull, the take up, the creep, the over travel, and the reset, they're pretty similar to factory. There's your take up. There's your creep and over travel. And there's your reset. So although it is a long trigger, just probably about as long as factory, I forget the exact numbers, I have to look myself. It is the lightest trigger, okay? So there you go, the Grayguns competition trigger system. Next up, we will talk about the Sig Armor and the Keyrez Pro. Okay, next up, which is my all-time favorite. I think everybody knows this by now. It's actually these kind of two put together, I guess you can say. So we have the Sig Armor competition level action job and the Keyrez Pro adjustable trigger. As far as the competition level action job from the Sig Armor, Robert Burke, there are two different options you can go with. You can go with the competition and you can go with the carry. Obviously the competition trigger is probably not something you want to carry around in your EDC or concealed carry pistol. So he does offer a carry level action job. $295 for the competition, $195 for the carry, okay? And then the Keyrez trigger, I believe that was 89 bucks. I'd have to double check. There are two different Keyrez triggers, the one that's adjustable and one that's non-adjustable. This is the adjustable. So let me talk about that first real quick. The Keyrez has two Allen screws underneath here, okay? One for, again, clear. One for take up and one for over travel. The more you keep adjusting these up, the less the amount is going to be there. So the reason why I currently have this in my X5 because of the Sig Armor trigger job is because when the Sig Armor does a trigger job, he's modifying the parts that are actually in your FCU. He's not replacing them with different design parts. So this is the trigger. This is a stock 320 trigger that was in the FCU when I sent it to him. And if you can see right here, this little nub is a TIG weld that he welds onto the shoe, and then he grinds it down a specific amount to where it does its thing by taking up the over travel. I guess that one probably is, or the take up. And he does this to the trigger shoe. He does it to the trigger bar. He does it to some components, and then, you know, he's kind of grinding things and shaping things and polishing things and smithing them, you know, to make them better than what they are and to perform a lot better. So I don't like the curved trigger, so this one was in it when I sent it to him, and to mimic what he has done here, that's why I use the Keyrez adjustable, okay? Because I like that really short trigger. I love this trigger in my 320. It feels really good, but I just don't like the curved triggers anymore. So I will send him another trigger and have him modify it like this one. Probably an Apex trigger shoe, because that seems to be what I like the most. So the Keyrez, I've heard some things where people aren't crazy about this little ridge in the middle of it right here, okay? To me, I shoot this gun I just went to the range today. It's a little bit dirty. It was really windy out, so I stopped shooting. Targets kept falling over and stuff, but I've shot the hell out of this trigger, this gun. 500 rounds usually when I go to the range, sometimes more depending on what I'm doing. I have had no irritation on my finger from this trigger, so I'm not sure what these people are. You can feel it. I can obviously feel it compared to a smooth flat trigger, but when you're shooting, you don't feel it. You don't realize it's there. It's not something that's annoying or throwing off my concentration because of this little ridge on there. So I mean, to each their own, you know. Certainly with the 365 triggers, there are some with a bump at the end that I don't really like on my finger. So I can understand why they're saying what they're saying, but me personally, I forget it's even there. It's not really a non-factor to me. So as you can see with the competition level action job. That's my take up. There's the wall. There's full rest. There's my creep and my over travel. And my reset. You can see it's ridiculous how short it is. So I think on the numbers, the total trigger travel, which is this, and the numbers were taken with this trigger in it as it came from Robert Burke, not with this trigger in it. But this is adjusted to have the same amount as this. But the total trigger travel in this competition level action job was equal to the Grayguns take up, the amount of take up that trigger had. So that's pretty significant. It's huge. Although it is the most expensive option, it is certainly the one that I take this one out and I put it in my other guns if I want to go shoot my other guns, just because I like it so much. So having said that, like I said, it's the most expensive. You're going to be without your gun for a few weeks. So if you have another gun, that's not really a huge deal. If you have one gun, then it could be an option for some people. I tell you what, it is well worth the money and the wait. I don't know why I waited so long to get this. If this had been one of my first ones, I probably wouldn't have even invested in any of these other triggers. So that's Robert Burke, Sig Armor, and the Keyrez Pro adjustable trigger. I do not have the non-adjustable trigger, so I don't have any numbers on that. In my numbers that I post with this video, I did two separate setups, one with no adjustment at all. Basically the screws are backed all the way out, and I did all my testing. That's, and put the numbers for the, the amount of trigger travel, take up, creep, reset, and then I wound them right up tight to where they are right now, the most dramatic setup you can have. And then I took numbers that way. So as far as the non-adjustable trigger, if it's shaped the exact same way and everything this one is, just doesn't have the screws, well then the data is valid for that trigger, but I cannot answer that. So I have seen people that have posted pictures of the non-adjustable trigger. They love it. I love the way it looks. It's the most unique one out of all of them. The way they have these, the lines up top here, the ridge down the middle, the shape of it. I mean, I love it. It's awesome. Excellent company. This is the second version. They contacted me telling me they upgraded it. They had bigger screws. Did I want the newer option? So I said yes. I sent mine out in the mail. 2 days later, this was in my mailbox. And then I did lose a screw, an adjustment screw, while I was cleaning. And then they sent me a whole baggie of screws with a new Allen wrench and Loctite and all that stuff. So awesome company, as is Apex and Robert Burke, Sig Armor. Love those guys. So that's the physical differences with the triggers. Now I want to show you in the next part how I got the numbers for testing. Okay, to kind of wrap this up, this is the test equipment that I use. This is the jig that I made to test the triggers themselves. Basically, I have a magazine that's bolted down to a piece of marble. And then I have an X grit that I've chopped the trigger guard off of, so my dial indicator can go right against the trigger. Having said that, FCUs vary, so you're not going to get the exact numbers that somebody else is getting. And what I mean by that is, like, my very first FCU that I had for the 320, this is like a pre-upgrade FCU. It's been upgraded, but it is like the lightest trigger, the smoothest. I mean, it's so broke in that it's kind of misleading, and I don't use it when I do these tests. I do it in the newest FCU I got. I bought a separate FCU by itself. It wasn't in a gun, and it had never been used. So I use that FCU because that's more realistic to where you can compare it and get similar results with yours. So if you kind of take a look at the Apex website and look at their expected results, they give it in percentages rather than numbers, because it's going to vary from person to person. So my reading of, a 4-pound trigger and you got a 4.5, maybe a 4 3/4, it is what it is. Not everybody's is going to be the same because it depends on how broken and how, you know, if I've polished all my FCU internals, so everything is nice and smooth, and that makes a difference. So you got to kind of remember that too. So in this jig, I put the FCU, whatever, and it's the same FCU for every single trigger. I totally take out everything, put it in that one FCU, test it. For the next trigger, I take all that out, put the other stuff in that FCU and test it. It's not a different FCU from a different gun. So that way I can keep all of my readings on a level playing field, okay? So in this, basically, you know, I'll have the FCU in there, and then I'll hold the trigger all the way forward, and then I'll adjust my dial to 0, and then I'll pull on the trigger till I feel the wall, and I'll watch my reading here in thousandths, how much that take up was, and then I'll 0 it at the wall, and I'll pull the trigger till it breaks, and I'll measure that as my creep. And then over travel is really hard. You can't do just over travel by itself. So total trigger travel minus take up minus creep is your, what's left is over travel. So that's how I got that number. And then I'll rack the slide, pull the trigger, rack the slide, set this to 0 with the trigger all the way back. And then coming forward, I'll measure my reset, okay? So that's how I got all the measurements in thousandths for my data. Hornady micrometer, I use this for reloading. I don't like the digital ones. This is tried and true, okay? So this is where I'm measuring my trigger bar pin, you know, how round it is, thickness, the distance from the apex where it swivels on. So just to give you an example here, let's see. This is a 365 trigger, the Sig one. So basically I'm measuring the trigger bar pin, obviously like this, you know, and then I'm measuring from the apex where the lever where the trigger is going to pivot on to the top of the trigger bar like that, or excuse me, the trigger bar pin. And I'm basically trying to find ways to measure this stuff the same way on every single trigger, okay? I can't do from the center of the pin that it hinges on to the center of the trigger bar pin, because then there could be some error in there, okay? It all depends on where my eyeballs are looking at and how it looks to me. So if I put it on the top of the trigger bar pin and underneath, you know, where it hinges, and then take that reading, that's what I used. And then my total trigger shoe is, you know, I go like this till it stops moving it. And then the max distance, I wrote that down, which a lot of that stuff really does not matter. I was just interested when there were some fitment issues on some trigger systems and trigger shoes. The pins, there's a variety of thicknesses from the manufacturers. Some are thicker than others, some fit tighter. Some triggers wouldn't reset because the pin was so big and it wasn't freed up in there. Sometimes you get some sloppy triggers because the pin's smaller, more forgiving. So I just kind of wanted to know all that, and that's why I included it and give it to you, whether it's useful for you or not. It is what it is. Trigger pull weight. I had the Lyman. I've had this one for a long time. And when I'm doing my trigger pull, okay, flat triggers are very subjective. You have people taking trigger pull weights from the very bottom of the trigger, which is not where you have your finger. It's not even realistic. It's yielding like a 2 or 3 pound trigger, which the company that makes the trigger doesn't even advertise it'll be that low. So I'm not sure why people are posting pictures of it being that low, because it's not actually that low. So I made up a jig. We can see this right here. It's just a piece of 2x4 with a 1x3 or whatever it is. And then basically what I would do is I would put the pistol like this on there, okay? And then I would put my trigger bar or my trigger pull gauge on this flat piece here, okay? So as long as this is flat on here, that the wand here on the trigger shoe is in the same exact place on the triggers, okay? So it's I made this here so it was as close to the center of the trigger as possible on every single one, okay? So it's not me holding it a little lower, me holding it a little higher. I eliminated that by having that jig to where everything was consistent, okay? When you do your trigger pull, you want to pull it as slow as possible. You do not want to jerk it. The momentum will decrease the reading. So when you're pulling this, you're going slow, 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 and then it clicks, and then you got your reading. So some people on Facebook were doing readings, but they were pulling it pretty quick, which I can get them down to 1 or 2 pounds if I do it that way. Again, it's not realistic. So the lineman, it wasn't very consistent using the jig and everything. The numbers kind of varied quite a bit. So I went and got the wheeler, and that seemed to resolve the issue. My numbers were very close, all of them. It'll tell you how many times you pull it here. So like I did a 10 pull average instead of a 2, 3, or 4, or 5, because one pull can upset them numbers. So a 10 pull was more realistic. With the wheeler, the sensor is here in the end of the wand, versus in the lineman, the sensor's inside the body of the unit itself. So I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but totally happy with this. I actually bought 2 of these, one by accident. I had 2 in my cart when I ordered it, didn't know it, but I've taken both side by side and used them and compared them against each other, and they're pretty much spot right on. So I'm a firm believer in the wheeler one. So that's that. So basically all my readings, I'm trying to keep everything on a level playing field, taking human error out of it, and then, you know, my preference and, you know, how I feel about it. I want to eliminate all that. That way you guys can watch this and look at the numbers, compare everything, and make your own decision based on, you know, what you're seeing. So that's the best I can do as far as, you know, showing you guys the differences between the triggers. So I hope this video has helped. Sorry it was kind of longer than always. Everybody says I love to talk, but I just want you guys to know as much as I can when I'm trying to show you this stuff. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it helps you make a better decision. Thank you very much.